Okay, we're live. Hi everyone, thanks for joining another STEM Women Hangout on Air. And today our guest is um, Dr. Amy Brand, who works at Digital Science, and she's going to talk to us about academic publishing and her career as the VP of Academic and Research Relations at Digital Science. So, Amy, hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you very much, Zuleyka and Buddhini. I'm very happy to be participating in this.
Mm-hmm. So, as usual, let's dive straight into the questions. So, can you tell us a bit more about your role and what you do at Digital Science?
Sure. I actually have two roles at Digital Science. One, as you mentioned, is as VP of Academic and Research Relations, and in that capacity, I maintain close relationships and cultivate relationships with institutional collaborators and partners on initiatives like co-hosting workshops, running community-wide initiatives and consortia, co-authoring white papers, all in the area of scholarly communication and research technologies. And part of the reason for doing that and to maintain that connection with the research community is to feed some of that expertise on institutional and research needs and trends back into digital science and digital science workflows. My other hat is as VP of North America for Digital Science. So we have a relatively large office now in Boston, actually in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the Kendall Square area, and I run this office and operations for Digital Science North America more generally.
So you've had an interesting so you've got a fellow social scientist, you've got a background in linguistics and a PhD in science. Can you tell us a bit about how this background helps you in your current role? Like obviously there's the research side of what you do.
Yeah, so yes, I'm a research scientist by training, and my area of research in that former life was on how language is learned and how language works in the minds and brains of children. And so I see my profession now in research communications and technologies as very consistent with that interest in language and communication. But more importantly, I think it really helps me tremendously to be a researcher and very familiar with the research process, what motivates academic scientists, how they think about disseminating and publishing their work, and think about obtaining access to information and finding collaborators, for example. Understanding that is very crucial in the role that I'm in now in digital science.
So what are some of the insights you have gained about how academics think and things like that?
Well, I mean, I understand, what academic incentives are and how they play into the research choices that people make. I understand how people think about how they present their work to the outside world. And part of that was being a researcher myself, but part of that was the job that I had at Harvard, where I worked very closely with faculty and sort of professional development for faculty in terms of promotion and tenure. So it's been a big part of my professional life before I came to digital science.
That's very interesting, and it leads us into the follow-up question. So you left academia to take up your current position. Can you tell us a bit about your career path, and how does, not being in academia compared to what you do now, especially as a working mother?
Sure. So, I mean, I see my career path as just following my nose towards things that strike me as the most compelling challenges to be working on, but it's all within that general realm of scholarly communications. So I started out in research science and moved from there into academic book publishing, in part because I really liked having my hands on a wide range of topics in my chosen field of cognitive science. So, rather than working on a particular specific research problem as you do as a researcher, I could embrace the whole forest of issues that I found interesting and not just a particular tree. And I had a lot of fun at the MIT Press, which is where I worked in book publishing for about 7 years. We were trying to help define the field of cognitive science, which is my chosen field, and had a big impact on the field by what and how we published, because we were publishing books that frame the key debates in cognitive science. We also did some very early experiments in electronic publishing, and I got really hooked on that. And that's ultimately what led me away from books into working on systems for digital science and scholarly publishing. In 2008, as researchers had started to advocate for open access, I thought that was a good time to go back to the university and help support some of those efforts. So I took a job at Harvard running the Office for Scholarly Communication and the Open Access Repository at Harvard. It had just launched, and later moved into the position of Assistant Provost for Faculty Appointments and Information at Harvard. And then I just moved to digital science in January of this year because I just thought this is definitely the place to be when it comes to innovating the future of technologies that support and enhance research. So that's my career path in a nutshell. You know, and I happen to like research and writing a lot, and I think I've carried that with me all through all of those steps on that path after leaving academia. I think the biggest difference is, you know, I'm not teaching every day, but I thought I was never really that strong a teacher personally, and that was one of the reasons why an academic career was less compelling to me. But I think an academic life can be a very good life for women today, and certainly my departure from academia had nothing to do with work-life balance, because I had left academia before I had my kids. Now, in the position that I had at Harvard through the end of 2013, I was actually working in an Office for Faculty Development and Diversity on developing policies and programs that help support work-life balance and you know, enable career advancement for women who have kids. And you know, Harvard's not alone. A lot of institutions have such programs. So I think in many ways, you know, academic institutions have become more progressive, at least in the U.S., than a lot of commercial organizations when it comes to enabling that work-life balance for working mothers and fathers.
You just briefly, you talked about your shift being around the time where open access was becoming more important. So for maybe younger or junior researchers who might be listening, can you just quickly tell us about what some of that motivation, what's the idea behind open access?
Sure. I mean, the idea is, as the process from the perspective of a researcher of publishing was moving all online, you know, people were perceiving that the contribution of publishers was less than it had been in the print space. I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding there, personally, about what actually goes into publication, but that was one of the motivators. And the others was the sense that if all this content is online, it should be easier to access if people are publishing stuff where the effort is, you know, 99% researcher and 1% publisher, which is often the perception. That it should be openly available. If the research is being funded by national funding organizations, you know, taxpayer dollars, it should be accessible to the broader community. I, you know, in general, feel very strongly about open access to research for all kinds of reasons. I think it's the right way to go, and I know that publishers are innovating in this space around business models to you know, to meet the demand for access from different sectors and try to sort of break out of the traditional journal subscription mold. But at Harvard, the focus was on self-archiving. It was getting the researchers to put the articles that they had published into an open access repository. The faculty at Harvard had been the first faculty in the United States to vote in an open access policy that essentially gave the university a prior non-exclusive license to their academic publications.
what's it been like? What can younger junior academics do if they're with your career path? What are the types of steps they should be taking? What should they be thinking about?
Yeah. Well, many people pursue science not because they're necessarily thinking of an academic career, but just because they're interested in the subject matter. I mean, that was definitely the case for me, and I know that academic training and scientific training in particular is highly valued in other professional sectors. So my advice is that doors open and job opportunities materialize when you take a deep interest in an organization or in a project and pursue that interest by networking. I mean, in fact, this works most reliably when you're not looking for a job and you're just knocking on doors because you're curious and you're enthusiastic. That's been my experience. So in terms of advice for early career researchers, that, as I said, was part of the work that I did at Harvard. I think for those choosing a path in science, the obvious thing, you get a big leg up by starting out life in a lab with a powerful PI that publishes a lot. But junior researchers also have to be really strategic about publishing and curating their own record of scholarship, presenting their work as often as possibly, aggressively managing the public online record of their research, not just the traditional publications, but also things like data and code. Never underestimate the value of good speaking and writing skills. Because academic careers are built on reputations that extend well beyond your own university to this global community of people in your chosen field. So it really pays to invest in actively cultivating and managing your reputation as a scholar.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't hide behind the stereotype of, being the scientist who can't make eye contact with people and doesn't know how to talk, but they're just was a genius sort of thing. It just doesn't work anymore because science is so collaborative now, and these big projects, you have to network to make things work.
Yeah, I agree completely.
So
and I see more and more universities, by the way, developing programs that help researchers to communicate publicly, to write for a broader audience. We did a lot of that at Harvard too.
That's what I was wondering, where you might see, academic blogging and social media fitting in. Do you think that for younger researchers, things are sort of changing at the moment, but do you see that blogging is just as important as academic publishing in early career, or would you say it's still about scientific publishing?
I think it is definitely growing in importance. It was not unusual for me to see at Harvard, for example, when people were compiling their records of scholarly activity for their annual review, blog postings listed among publications. So I actually do think it's really important to use alternative vehicles for getting the word out about your work, for drawing attention to your publications through blogging, for example. I think you can go both ways. I mean, I've seen people who completely ignore social media and do just fine, and others who really embrace it, and it can really enhance, their reputations and their presence in their fields.
Mm-hmm.
So,
thanks.
Sure.
So one of the problems we see is that there's lots of research that shows that women are underrepresented in academic journals. They tend not to be listed as first author, and they tend to publish in areas that attract less funding. But this research is important to health, social, and technological change. What do you envision for the future of scholarly publications, particularly for women? And how might digital publishing challenge the existing gender trends?
It's a great question, and it's a topic that I care deeply about. There's also strong data showing that men tend to self-cite their work much more frequently than women, and that has a strong impact on the gender gap in citations. There are several ways in which women can take more control over curating their record of scholarship. One is creating a scholarly identity online through tools like the ORCID researcher identifier, and I can talk more about that. Using it to associate themselves with research works beyond that traditional article, things like proceedings and presentations and data sets and computer code. They should use the institutional repository at their institution if they have one to maximize access to their work. They should track news about their work, downloads, usage, social media pertaining to their work in a way that they can incorporate these alternative indicators into their records of their work and their impact. And then we talked about blogs. I think they should also make use of alternative channels for disseminating their work. So yes, I mean, digital publishing and digital tools are allowing researchers, both men and women, to take more control over their work and the impact of their work and how it's presented to the world.
You mentioned before that you'd worked on some gender initiatives within Harvard. What were some of the things that were coming out of the work in terms of gender diversity?
I don't know, Zuleyka, I was having a hard time hearing that question. Maybe, Buddhini, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I think Zuleyka was asking you about, I can hear echo in myself as well, and I'm not sure why Google is not having a good day today. But Zuleyka was asking you about the other initiatives that you had worked on at Harvard relating to your answer about what we can do to address this gender imbalance.
We ran programs for postdocs and junior researchers on how to get their work published. For social scientists, for example, we ran regular workshops on getting books published, and for everyone else, we ran workshops on using social media for scholarly purposes and how to get journal articles published, how to talk to journal editors, how to deal with requests to revise and resubmit, how to think about where to publish, all of those things. So it's part of our normal faculty development program there. And so that wasn't specifically geared towards, gender imbalance, but I think, I see a lot of the issues that come out as being about gender in publication really being about senior-junior often. They're often the same thing, and I think that supporting junior researchers, providing that guidance is definitely a way of helping young women scientists.
Yeah, absolutely, because when you have the leaky pipeline, there's disproportionately more men in senior positions. So as you say, it's, junior, senior versus male, female, it's both are true because of that.
In part, yeah.
Do you see lots of reluctance from younger scientists to embrace social media and science communication? So a few months back, I think it was Genome Biology published this satire article about the Kardashian index, and it can be quite discouraging to younger scientists who try to write about science to be mocked like that. About their efforts on engaging with the public on Twitter and things like that. Do you see people being reluctant to be active on social media because they're fearful they won't be taken seriously as scientists? Essentially, well, you have so much time to tweet, how come you're not writing papers?
I think it is true, and I'm thinking back to the patterns that I saw again at Harvard, that it tended to be already tenured, more secure faculty members who were likely to go all out when it came to having a social media presence. Because you're right, I mean, I think for junior scientists, it is a little bit risky, given that often the kinds of communications that you see aren't, controlled editorially or curated. You never know what's gonna happen. In an online environment where anybody can respond. You don't know who's responding when you're tweeting or blogging. So there are those risks. I think that, I mean, there are two sides to the social media coin, right? There's using it aggressively, like tweeting a lot, and then there's actually understanding and making use of what those tweets say about your own work. And so I think when we were encouraging people to be social media savvy, it was more about the latter than the former. Although, as I said, I do think that in lots of situations, blogging about work that whether it's published and you want to point to it, or creating a constituency of interest around things that you care deeply about, are good things to do. They're perfectly fine things to do. So it is still kind of a messy gray area. But I don't think I ever encountered anybody who said, this, out of the question, I'm definitely not going to do this. Maybe with the exception of Facebook. You would often hear very strong opinions about Facebook from academics, like I'll never do that, for professional reasons. But people were asking the right questions for sure.
Yeah.
Science. So your organization specifically, or maybe broadly thinking about digital tools that are available, do you see that these will help some of the gender disparity we're seeing in scientific publishing, and how might this help?
Yeah, I think they help by giving more control back to the researcher, right? We're sort of used to an academic or scientific record that is controlled by publishers and aggregators of content and indexers and tools like the Web of Science that provide an analysis of impact of journals. And there's definitely still a lot of that, and all of that still matters. But I think that there is now sort of a more informal channel which has a lot of interest and viewership of its own that people have more control over. So I think that that's good for younger scientists to be able to, as I said, whether it's on an institutional repository, whether it's through something like the ORCID Researcher ID initiative, to be able to say, yes, those publications are associated with me, but also, so is this data set that I contributed to my field. So are these other activities, such as code that I've published. I think that's that can be empowering to younger scientists and women if they take advantage of those kinds of tools. In a sense, what we're seeing with the digital tools is this broadened record of scholarship. It's no longer just the scholarly article, right? You're seeing all kinds of related information about it, and people have more control over those related works and related elements. So yeah, I think things are definitely changing in the right direction. I mean, you often hear people say, well, nothing's really going to change in scientific publishing until the sort of general practices around promotion and tenure change. But I was giving a talk recently to a bunch of publishers in London, and I said, well, actually the publishing community can have a real impact here, because it can help legitimize those less traditional things. So, for example, by including alt metrics, such as information about who paid attention to this article in blogs and tweets and news stories, etc., it legitimizes them if it's included in the published article. Similarly, if data is included or linked to from the published article, it's bringing that into the formal record of scholarship.
Yeah, that sounds really great. There's the research paper I read. I think it was published in the past minute, doing most of the social media communication. So I can see that those alt metrics will really help women's inclusion in scientific publishing.
Yeah, I expect so.
So can you tell us a bit about the taxonomy initiative, and how do you see this changing the landscape of academic research publication for women?
Sure. You're referring to the contributor role taxonomy. It now has a name. It's called Project Credit, where the CRT in credit stands for contributor role taxonomy. And the idea is to provide an alternative to relying on name order and multi-authored works, and use instead a standardized set of tags that capture contribution. You could be talking about someone being the lead conceptual person in a paper, someone contributing computation and code, someone really owning the methodology of the paper, someone owning the data or curating the data. And by calling this out, the hope is that this will really, democratize and depoliticize authorship and credit, because it will be transparently clear who contributed what to a publication. Because right now our standards within academic publishing for authorship and credit and attribution are really dysfunctional. And it's like when you have lots of authors, the order of names just exists to be gamed, right? It's very, very political, and I think that can be very bad for women in particular. So with the contributor role taxonomy, it's, the senior person in the lab who, say, obtained the funding can be tagged as having obtained the funding for the project without bumping a more junior person who did most of the research and writing off the author list or to the back of the author list, because that junior person is the one who really needs the publication credit for career advancement. Or if someone has contributed a really important, unique methodology to a paper, that can be tagged and called out, because generally what you see with methodologists is that they're going to be the middle author in a list of authors because they're not the conceptual lead, when in fact their methodological work is their important contribution on which they should be evaluated, and those cases for evaluation for faculty appointments can be particularly difficult. So I think that the contributor role stuff will really help neutralize the gender politics of authorship. At least that's our hope.
Yeah, that would be, because most non-academics don't realize how competitive and political and it's like a soap opera when it comes to a big collaborative project, and when it's time to publish and you're like, I'm first author, no, I'm first author, I did XYZ, but you did, it becomes such a battle, and people fight for days over that sort of thing. So yes, the work you're doing sounds really interesting for trying to neutralize that.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this project. We're working closely with the Wellcome Trust in the UK, and also with a standards organization in Canada called CASRA, and NISO, the National Information Standards Organization here in the States. And we will be launching the taxonomy itself and a bunch of pilot projects in December of this year. So a lot of publishers are very interested in this, and I'm very, very excited about it.
So we're almost up on our half an hour, Amy. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add to our discussion? Just a final, word of advice, to younger women, and men in science, is that, be careful about planning your career too precisely and too far ahead, because, it's always best to just cultivate what your deep intuitive interests are. And sometimes it may seem like you're taking a meandering path. I mean, I certainly did. But I also found out that when I was taking that step sideways, it often was a shortcut upwards. And so your career path can make brilliant sense in hindsight, when you're looking back, from a ripe old age like me. So that's my word of advice. Thanks. That's a really excellent point to end on.
Yeah.
So to our viewers, thank you for joining us, and we'll actually be returning to the topic of science publishing more broadly in a couple of weeks. We've got a special panel coming up, and in between, we'll bring you another special discussion with an international guest from, I don't know if I should say too much further, but we've got a couple of exciting coming up in a couple of weeks, so make sure that you're following us on Twitter and on our Google Plus account.
Yeah, thank you everyone for watching, and we'll have a write-up of this Hangout as well available on our website, so if you couldn't follow the thing because of the technical issues, you can read all about it as well, because I can hear echoes on my end as well. Thank you, Google.
All right.
Thank you for joining us, Amy.
Thank you both. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Amy.
Bye.